here to keep in mind some of the readings that we've done so far in terms of the work with David Bierman Scott, in terms of the work with James Potter and his mention in terms of attention span, because a lot of this stuff comes into play, especially when it comes to this first chapter. And this first chapter of Media Flight Plan is going to be kind of unlike any other when we get into this particular set of new rules and instructions of things we need to be thinking about. So the David Bierman Scott stuff was very big thinking and major ideas in terms of what you should be looking for. A lot of the stuff we're going to be going over now comes into that nitty-gritty, and I hope that as you're going through along with these ideas that you kind of look into combining both of them together, because they do belong together very well. It's hard to see that sometimes just because I do isolate them at particular times, but when it comes to measuring, when we think of the ideas of what is in Media Flight Plan and what are some of the ideas within media planning in general, it just doesn't sometimes equate to some of the new technologies. And I challenge you to use those new technologies, to use social media, because in a lot of ways it is the way of how we're doing things now in the media planning world versus how we used to do it. And a lot of what we'll be talking about is that how we used to do it. And I want you to know it because it's still effective and it's still very much used today in different ways that I thought possible. But again, they're very much prevalent in terms of our media landscape even now, even though things are changing and we're starting to look at different metrics as we're moving on here. So, but please pay attention to them. They're going to be very important, especially when it comes to evolving your media schedule, putting things into a budget, that sort of thing. So the first chapter, as I stated, is going to be a little bit different from all the rest, because this is when we learn to, quote, speak media. And through that, we've got to kind of develop our media languages. It's extremely important to understand what it is in terms of media planning that we're trying to develop and understand. And I've got a couple terms on the board. I'll tilt the camera to talk about how to equate some of those problems on the board here. But they are very helpful in terms of the main ones we'll be using. The one thing I will mention is I didn't put up cost on there, but I will be going over those towards the end of the video, if not tomorrow, if there's time. And we'll talk about those as we go. But first, let's talk about speaking the media. And speaking the media comes into this idea of the language. And the first thing we have to go through when we're talking about media language is understanding our universe. And this gets interpreted incorrectly in a lot of cases, because when people think universe, they think very large scale. And in a way, we're doing very large scale. But we're doing something that's consistent with your universe. So if we're talking about social science or anything like that, this is what would be called a population. So a population is a group of people that you specify that's going to target the best answer for your question that you're trying to bring in. And so for research design, this would be a kind of thing where you'd ask a research question and then you'd say, who would be the most prevalent audience for this kind of study? So in this case, you kind of set an area of demographics, psychographics, and so forth to help represent that particular population, and you pull from that area. So in this case, a universe is something very similar to that. So if you look on page 1 of your Media Flight Plan book, you'll notice that it's a group of persons in a particular geographic area. So a lot of you have chosen small businesses, and that's good for your universe because typically you're not going to reach too far outside of the city in this case, unless you have a corner of the market that isn't reached by other places. So let's say you have a product that is not very highly competed against, and people travel a significant distance to go to your place to pick up something or to experience something. You might have a really extravagant restaurant, for instance, that people travel to miles to get to. Then you could say that may be part of my universe, but typically a good friend of mine who's worked in media planning for years says he kind of uses his universe as a, quote, ADI, which is area of dominant influence. And this is a common term within radio. which basically means within FM radio here, you've only got a set section within the city that can actually hear it. Once you're starting to go out of it, you're not going to use it anymore. So again, that's the basis of your universe. But we base that not only in terms of geography, but demographics as well. So you can start to think of some of those demographic areas in terms of age, sex, etc. That kind of hone into a little bit of that particular area. And again, partly is why I had you do buyer personas kind of straight off the bat, because it starts to narrow in of what that universe might look like. And so having that demographic is very key in terms of who you're aiming for. So how do we determine a universe? So I want you to start to think about your particular client that you've got for your media schedule, for your media plan that you plan on representing. So in this case, I'm going to choose Footsloggers. So Footsloggers is an outdoor store here in Boone, and Footsloggers typically sells things like hiking gear, sometimes skiing gear, climbing gear, that kind of thing. It's a very outdoor-oriented store. And you have to say to yourself, who is that universe for someone like Footsloggers? So we might determine that representative population in this case, aka who is most likely to shop there. So we can say that usually we have a collective group of people in our psychographic who are very outdoor oriented. They usually have some disposable income just because it's kind of expensive in there for a lot of products that you're trying to look at. Or it can be that people enjoy spending the type of money that they know that they're getting a quality product. But again, they're hikers, they're climbers, they're skiers, and all these different variables come into play in terms of a major demographic that comes into this. Now, it can be a demographic to say, typically you might say ages to 18 to 34, typically people who are more likely to be active and more likely have time to be active. So I'm not trying to say that if you're over the age of 35, you're not active. What I'm trying to say is that we're going into the, again, more likely presence of younger people being able to go out a little bit more. You always got to take these demographic things with a grain of salt. Men and women can be a little tricky as well. But then determining these demographics in terms of age, sex, income, that's the kind of thing of other demographics that might be applied. Now, does this particular class that we're in fit Footsloggers? And I typically say yes. A lot of you expressed interest in hiking outdoors, being outdoors. A lot of you expressed interest in general physical activity. And so part of that may be that not necessarily that I could say 18 to 34 are my primary buyers in terms of collecting this information, but I might also go in and say there is a collective group of people who are older than the age of 34 that actually really like to be active and really like hiking and so forth. And you might sit there and say, I'm really missing this demographic. So in a campaign, that may be the selective universe. So in other words, you pick the universe. So think about that when you're looking at your particular client that you're trying to propose out there. You may say to yourself, what is the particular universe that I'm looking for? Instead of what is the particular universe that I have. And those can work in both ways. So you can say a universe is good the way that it is now and I want to continue to work with that universe. Or you can say, in this particular case, I am noticing that there's not a lot of people that are buying this product. They seem to be well within the psychographic or the buyer demographic within my particular product. Maybe I should be targeting after them. So, for example, so Ocean Spray has mentioned in several occasions that they had, I'm going to use a different topic. Snapple. Let's stay with Snapple for now. Snapple has come in record in saying that we noticed that a lot of people in the heartland, which in this case was around New York City, usually typically older demographic, so again, this is your 34 years and older, that are typically drinking Snapple products. And in their case, they said, we're not looking for this. We're looking through 18 to 21. And so that's going to be our universe. That's the people we want to look at outside of New York, 18 to 21. How do we do that? So again, proposed universe can be a little complex in that regard in terms of, I'm definitely not going to get to price today. Sorry, I'm a little off track here. Proposing that universe can be a bit of a challenge, but ultimately it makes sense for what you're trying to do in terms of your campaign. So again, whether it's the strengths that is your proposed universe or your weaknesses that you want to propose to your universe is completely up to you. So, but be thinking about that, as that's going to be really important to cover over. So that's your universe. So within the universe, we have to bring in some of the ways that we measure that universe. So it's not enough just to say 18 to 34-year-old women within the Boone, North Carolina area. So that can be one particular universe that we're looking at in terms of who we're targeting after. But this is where it comes into impressions, exposure, and reach. And you'll start to see, I'm going to exit out of this program right here. You'll start to see, sorry about that, reach up here, which is your people reached versus your people in the universe. And so the reach is based on something that's called an impression. So an impression in this case, let me get back to, okay. An impression in this case is one opportunity for an individual to see an advertisement, or in this case, it's more of a vehicle. So the opportunity is key here, because we might sit here and say, I have the opportunity to see, let's say we're looking at a bus, and somebody puts a bus wrap on the Apple cart. I don't know if you can do that, or they have advertisements in the Apple cart here in Boone, and we could say, I'm like actually looking at one right now. It doesn't look like there's any advertisements on it, but you get what I'm trying to refer to here. Currently, right now, we have Sugar Mountain's Oktoberfest that's kind of spread all throughout the bus stops here in Boone. I walk around a lot on campus that I can see these. And so if I were to sit there and say, okay, we have, 18,000 students that attend Appalachian State University. They are walking through App State at any given point in time for classes. Let's say the average person has 3 times a day where they could potentially see this particular advertisement. And so this is kind of where impressions come in, is that each time that you go past there, you have that impression. Now, it's important to note 2 things. First, it's about the media vehicle, not inherently the advertisement itself. So let me repeat that. It's not inherently about the commercial or the print ad. It's about the media vehicle. So in this case, you might say, I could look at a potential television spot. Let's say we're watching, a Sunday football game for the NFL. We might say that, yeah, we have a lot of impressions for people who are watching this particular game on television. So it's a high likelihood that they would be able to have that opportunity to see your advertisement. However, and this comes to point number 2 here, what do we know about this idea of opportunity and vehicles versus actual commercials itself? And this goes into our evidence within James Potter and saying your attention span and our intentional state. So a lot of what I was looking for when we were talking about some of the areas within how much you actually pay attention while you're watching these particular vehicles. So when you were doing your media logs, this was important. I was really asking for not only the opportunity, but how much were you actually paying attention while this was going on? So a lot of you came in and communicated that, honestly, I was doing a lot of other stuff. And that's certainly explains a lot. And it also gets into this notion that you may be immersed into the television and the show that you're watching or the music that you're listening to. But once an advertisement comes on, we may be less inclined to actually listen to it. We may turn the station off. We may turn it to a different channel. We may mute it for whatever reason. And again, that's kind of the starting point of that. And it also gets into your exposure, which is consuming the ad, as well as your reach, which in this case is a count of a person with at least one impression. So each person is only counted once, and it's based on your selective universe. So again, if I've got these Sugar Mountain Oktoberfest, as I'm kind of advertising it right now, all over campus currently, I have to say, what's my selective universe? And I would really hope that part of that selective universe, giving that Oktoberfest strictly revolves around alcohol, is 21 and older. So, with that being said, we've got to hone in our universe even more based on our reach. So it may be one thing to say, all right, within reach, let's go back to our little board here. Within reach up here, again, I don't know if you can read this. Within reach, it's the people reached divided by the people in the universe. So if you reach a lot of people, that's a great thing. However, it may not be the people within your universe. So for Sugar Mountain, if you need the ages of 21 or older, you have to consider how many people are taking the bus. How many people are more likely to take the bus in terms of the people within your universe? So if it's 21 and older, you may say the people who stop here are maybe the people who are parking out in State Farm lot. So State Farm is usually dedicated towards our freshmen who are just kind of getting started out living in the dorm. You don't have a whole lot of reason to leave campus. So what do? They take the bus. And that's kind of an easily accessible manner of being able to go through this. So again, this reach right here, in terms of the universe, you may be missing out on a colossal segment in terms of who you're trying to advertise to. So again, App State's probably a smart idea to go after, but maybe in this case for sugar, it's not inherently the smartest to go after that particular area. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I just keep seeing them. And so with this taken into consideration, I also noticed them on King Street. So there's a lot of advertisement there. And I sit there and say, that's a good spot for it. Because again, these are kind of these boutiques where faculty go to for lunch. They talk to me all the time about how they go to this, that, and the other for downtown Boone, as well as students who are over the age of 21 that go constantly to these smaller restaurants for good craft beer. And in which case, this might be a good example of where to advertise versus a bus stop. So, again, the reach is important in terms of your selective universe. And we've seen, again, this particular formula up here, reach equals number of people reached divided by number of people in the universe times 100. Typically, the 100 times 100 is just for purposes of simple math. You'll notice that anytime that you're putting in impressions, the only time you report the actual number in its entirety is at the very end. So for a year campaign, for our Snapple campaign that we did, it came out to be about 1 trillion impressions or something along those. I can't remember the exact number it was off the top of my head. But again, it makes for easier math in this case, and it also makes it that, again, we've got this representative population, or excuse me, representative sample, can't talk today, to represent this population, or in this case, our universe. So that's part of the times 100, because again, Nielsen only calculates a very small percentage of what is actually being represented, but it's supposed to be accurate. So out of your sample population, how many people will be exposed to the program and thus potentially your ad is basically what this reach does. So reach is very important. And so high reach is typically a strong opportunity for exposure. And this is why it's so easy for people who are in this industry to automatically go towards reach as kind of our definitive. We really stay within our universe and the impressions that are evaluated through this reach. And with that, we say we have the best opportunity this way to expose because, again, bigger numbers, bigger people in our universe equals the smartest decision for, again, bang for our buck here, which isn't inherently true. There's obviously some issues with that. James Potter talked about it. David Meerman Scott talked about this. And again, this is why I'm trying to get you to think outside the box when it comes to promoting these ideas. So I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't, please ask me questions. This is what we're here for. It takes a little bit to get some of this information on kind of through processing. So next is ratings, and you can see up here, so ratings is in the middle here. So this is people exposed to the vehicle divided by people in the universe. So, and it's also, the important thing to consider about this one, it's expressed in a percentage. Although they don't, it's weird, it's expressed as a percentage, but they don't report it as a percentage. So, for example, the 2017 Super Bowl had a household rating of 45.3, which is kind of in your 45% range. However, they don't report it as 45%. They report it as 45.3. So, if you got a 45.3 as a household rating, you're doing pretty good. But again, the Super Bowl is often the most televised and watched media vehicle at the present time. Still, so it looks at this area of a portion of the demographic universe that is exposed to a specific media expressed as a percentage of the universe. So I hope that makes sense. And this is what the Nielsen ratings do. The Nielsen ratings in a very small collective say, this is our representative sample, this represents a greater population, and through that we have these numbers. And again, this is typical for a lot of industries in advertising, that they say the bigger the rating number, the better it's going to be as far as getting our exposure out there. Which again, is something we've known for years, but is it inherently true now? Typically, yeah, still is. And again, that's why we keep using it. We wouldn't be wasting millions of dollars just for the hell of it, but although some people seem to want to, because again, if you look at the video I showed to you about Super Bowl advertising. And with that, we might also look in terms of share, which indicates the portion of available television audience who is viewing a program. And again, bigger is not always better. And it helps us put ratings into perspective. And so if you look at page 4, that can help you a little bit. So ratings in this case are, again, number of people exposed to a vehicle divided by number of people in the universe times 100. We can also calculate this by PUT, which is per people viewing the television, versus HUT, which is household viewing, which is number of people using a TV during a time period, and persons in the universe times 100. So this is all kind of the start of where we're going with our ratings. So that's kind of helping me explain, sharing that. So again, if you have questions, please let me know. This is why I'm not going to go over everything in terms of cost and so forth. So the last thing I want to go over, and these are terms that we're going to need to know. So reach and impressions are very important. Ratings are very important, as my phone goes off. Sorry about that. The other thing I want us to know is impressions, and gross impressions and rating points. So first, I kind of have to ask for a question is, how do you plan for a party? So you've ever had friends over, you might say it's easy when it's just one person you have over. You can cater to those specific needs. However, what if it's a group of 30 people? How do you plan to accommodate for those 30 people? So do you have enough to eat, drink? Do you have seating arrangements narrowed down? Too few refreshments or too few food, people get angry. Or if too many, which is typically what I do. So anytime if I'm throwing a party, I often buy too much of what I need, and I'm wasting my money. Unless, now this is where the comparison ends, unless I say to myself, well, I plan on eating or drinking it anyway after the party is over, so I don't waste money because it's still for me. So this is why I typically say usually spend a little bit more versus less when it comes to partying. However, what about if it's a campaign? So, and this is where gross impressions and gross rating points come in here. Because typically we're talking about one opportunity and one viewer probability of watching this once. Okay, that's nice. What about the campaign? So gross impressions are that total number of opportunities in a campaign. So if we go back to impressions here, we might say it's one opportunity for an individual to see an advertisement. However, for gross impressions, we might say total number of opportunities in a campaign. So those are often colossal numbers. So again, in our case, it was about 1 trillion impressions based on all the media that we planned on using. I can't remember Snapple's budget, but it was based for a year. So that was where we were getting out of this. The other thing I want to mention is the material of gross rating points, which are also commonly known as, and you'll hear me refer to them a lot, as GURPS. Some people in the industry call them GRIPS. I've only met 1 or 2 people that have ever called them that, but typically we're referring to them as GURPS. And GURPS, in this case, is when we take the impact. It's a math equation that we particularly use, used by media planners, determine how many people within an intended audience may see that ad over a period of time. So GURPS in this case are gross impressions divided by the universe times 100. Or, as kind of an alternative you can use here, it can be the number of spots that you use times the rating. And you'll notice this in your homework that you'll do in exercise 1, that somebody will say, okay, we've got 3 spots that we want you to advertise for the HBO movie that has a rating of, I think it was 0.3. So in this case, you go in and say the number of spots. So let's say it's 4 spots times the rating, which would be 1.2 GURPS, I think, if I'm doing that right. So again, this is kind of when we bring into kind of counting more than once over the course of a campaign. And then there's also frequency, which is the average number of times a reached individual was exposed to a particular campaign. And that can be a little complicated, especially when you consider a brand like Geico, who runs multiple big idea campaigns in a year. They do a lot of different stuff that's really interesting in this case. So I've showed you the main formula for GURPS. So keep that into consideration. And a lot of this is kind of plug-in algebra. So if you're really trying to figure out a medium, you can always call the medium itself and talk about advertising space. And please make sure you're saying, I'm doing this for a class before you do anything. So that's one way of doing this. You can always look at their media guide. So a lot of you have national recognized programs and clients. One of the best things to do is go through their media plan, and a lot of them will actually have what you're looking for in terms of how much it costs. So let's say you want to publish in a magazine or on Facebook. You can go on Facebook's website and check how much it is for a boosted post. You know, a couple of years ago, my students did an advertisement for Mary Kay in Cosmopolitan, and they were able to go into their media guide and say, how much does it cost to advertise? And they'll demonstrate a quarter of ad space, half of ad space, full page, where it is. So if it's inside of the cover versus the back cover versus the centerfold, I mean, all these different places that you can call, how much it costs to put these advertisements in there. So again, it's a large selection of where you can put things. And this kind of gets into some of these areas in terms of cost, which is what I'm going to go over tomorrow. So I'm not going to really go over the homework on Chapter 1. I'll kind of save that for another day, and primarily because I want you to try doing them before I give you the answers. So like I said, I will go over more in depth the ideas of pricing on Wednesday, and then if you've got any questions over the next few days, I'll be happy to address them as need be. So that's it for today. I hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon, and make sure to turn in those buyer personas when you get the opportunity. Otherwise, take care, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Okay, bye.